first, I'd like to welcome to the stage our three panelists for the National Security and Technology panel. We have the Honorable Ronald Johnson, who is the former U.S. Ambassador to El Salvador from 2019 to 2021. He has also served over 20 years in the CIA and 20 years in the U.S. Army, so I think he's got a little background on this area. And then we've also got Ambassador Johnson, go ahead and come on up here. We also have Ben Carson Jr. Ben Carson Jr. is the co-founder and partner at FVL Crum, where he's responsible for the overall guidance of the company and the portfolio. And then we have the moderator of the panel, Hamlet Youssef, who's the managing partner at Irongate Capital Advisors, and also want to thank Irongate once again for being a sponsor of this program. So I will let Hamlet lead it off for you, and this panel will last about an hour, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome here. I think when I had a chance to pull this panel together, I think as any good panelist should do, surround yourself with people much smarter and better looking than you. So I had a short list there, and I had the pleasure of having Ambassador Johnson and Ben Carson on stage here with us today. Just quick way of background and kind of where we come at this, and I'll let everyone kind of get into their bios as well. I'm I guess a South Florida native. Moved here in 1980 after the fall of the Shah. Born in Iran, ethnically Armenian and Assyrian. And then after working in the private sector, I got a chance to join the intelligence community, where I worked for a good chunk of my career. And now we're an investor in technology. We feel that it's important to get folks to invest at the intersection of national security and defense. So the themes we're going to cover here today are going to talk about kind of how the geopolitical landscape has changed. Not necessarily changed, but I would say more, I think we've been illuminated in terms of what's happening in the world today. And then discuss what that means and its impact on culture, politics, and governance. So that's my quick background. Ambassador Johnson, have you go, and then Ben, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Thank you. Well, you know, I always feel compelled to give the required disclaimer. I do not speak on behalf of the United States government or any government or private entity. I will not reveal any information obtained via classified means, but I do have opinions that I have developed over a great many years working in government service, and I share those pretty freely. So I look forward to discussing these topics with you, but I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Hamlet.
Sure. So Hamlet, thanks for having me, and thank you to the Economic Club for allowing us to join you today. And I don't have any cool disclaimers. That was a really cool disclaimer. One day maybe I'll have the ability to say something like that. But one quick correction on the firm. So it's called Fulcrum. We just spell it wrong. So we're excited to be here. And quick background: I'm an investment banker by training. Had the pleasure of meeting Hamlet many years ago in the cyber corridor back in Washington, D.C., Maryland area, as we were looking at different cybersecurity and quantum and all sorts of other technologies that hopefully America can continue to remain dominant in. And Hamlet just struck me as a visionary. He's one of the best guys in the game, has amazing updates. If Hamlet ever shares any of those, it's a blessing to be able to receive those. But phenomenal mind and phenomenal perspective around many of the things going on around the country and around the globe. And another one of my friends that I call on these types of issues here as well, General Tony Tata, who, thank you, General, for even before this panel giving me a couple pointers on what's going on. But my current day job, Fulcrum, we're investing in what we consider to be probably our most valuable resource in this country, which is the people. So we have a very direct approach to aligning impact and alpha to invest in underrepresented communities, underserved communities. It's not necessarily only about ethnicity, it's about investing where we can close the wealth gap, where we can create sustainable opportunities so that people can live the American dream, and do that with an emphasis on disparities. We have to be very intentional about that effort. We've been doing it now for about 10, 15 years. And we've done enough work now that we achieved a public welfare designation on a private equity fund that is Volcker exempt and CRA eligible, so a whole bunch of jargon that means the government thinks what we do is a good thing for the world. So excited to be here. We're about $500 million under management and growing, and excited to also see some of the other investors in here later on speaking as well. But looking forward to a great conversation today on something we consider to be an absolutely critical conversation in this country.
Great, thanks. All right, so jumping into this, just not to get too overly wonky here in terms, how many of you all heard of the term great power competition? Okay. DC likes acronyms, so great power competition was this esoteric term that I think the think tanks in DC came up with to talk about the disruption or the conflict coming between the West and China, particularly the Communist Party. We started talking about this as a fund about 7-8 years ago, I think when we first met. And we had this view that the world was getting into a second Cold War, if not a much bigger conflict. Not only was it a nation-state conflict, but it was a conflict that talked about how governance would shake out for the rest of the 21st century. Do we want a style of governance that's based on centralized command and control, few control the masses, or do we want a true kind of a libertarian a form of governance where the individual is more at the center of what's going on? And I think that's a dynamic that started playing into national security and defense. When you look at the adversaries, as I like to call them, the totalitarian band of misfits, or the axis of authoritarianism between Xi, Putin, North Korea, and the mullahs in Iran. There's a stark contrast between that and Western values. We talked about this about 5-6 years ago, and I think for the most part people didn't really understand what this conflict was going to look like. Post-COVID, Ukraine invasion, and now the activities of Hamas and Hezbollah in the Middle East, and kind of the hegemonic views of the Iranian regime. A lot of this is starting to come to light. Ambassador Johnson and I have had a good pleasure of having kind of these oh shoot briefs with folks. I think we scared the bejesus out of some folks when we've gone kind of crass and blunt in terms of what's happening. But let's begin there, Ambassador Johnson, with your role when you got into the ambassadorship in El Salvador. What were you seeing there in terms of what China and Russia, kind of what their intentions were for us from a geopolitical standpoint, and then from there I think we'll navigate into Middle East and Ukraine as well.
When I got to El Salvador, the president at the time, which is the current president, Nayib Bukele, had been in office for about 5 months. And just prior to him taking office, his predecessor had agreed to switch diplomatic relationships between Taiwan to the People's Republic of China, which is anything but the people's. So I sort of arrived there. He inherited that relationship, and our early conversations focused a great deal on, can you switch back? And frankly, he was very concerned with what China might do to his small country and his economy if he did switch back. It's never been done before. And the other thing that I felt put me at a bit of a disadvantage is we had also, the United States of America had also signed on to that same program. So it made it difficult for me to then try and convince him, or anyone else for that matter, that they need to change their diplomatic relationships when ours were the same way in recognition of the People's Republic of China and One China. We signed on to One China policy. So very difficult. I changed my conversation to ensure that you do not become dependent on China for your security or your economy. And I think that's the same thing we've seen all over the world. And we call it debt diplomacy by China, but I think it's more than that. I think it's engineered dependency. They want to create a situation where you will be dependent upon them for your national economy. You need them, you can't survive without them. And the one thing that I did that I think was pretty effective in El Salvador, and I think I've actually seen it used and effectively in other places, and that is think about why the United States of America wants you to succeed as a smaller democracy in the Western Hemisphere, and you can use this anywhere, you could use it in Africa, why do we want you to be successful? And the answer is, we want you to be a strong, democratic nation that is of and by and for the people. We want you to have a strong economy. We want to trade with you. We want you to be a good partner with us. And we want to see your institutions thrive. If that happens, it's good for you and it's good for us. Now think about, why does China want to see you successful? I'm like, they don't. In fact, if you fail as a democracy, that benefits China. And if along the way to that failure, you create a growing dependency upon China for your economy, that is in their favor, not yours. The only reason that they're here and they think that relationship between the People's Republic of China and El Salvador is because it is a prick in the side of the United States. The only common factor that exists there is the factor between the Chinese military, Chinese intelligence, the Chinese economy, and their intent to put themselves in a location that is of utmost concern to the United States, only 2.5 hours away. So I'll stop with that for now.
It's good commentary there. I think for me, it actually talks to what got me going on my write-ups. I think when I got geopolitics way wrong was, I think, the night before Putin invaded, you texted me like, is he really going to do this? Like, there's no way he's stupid enough to do this. In goes Putin. But that's when I began to kind of talk about what we saw with the invasion of Ukraine was the beginning of a 3-act tragedy. And leave it for a guy named Hamlet to talk about Shakespearean tragedies. But Act 1 was the invasion of Ukraine. It was Putin trying to kind of rebuild the buffers of the old Soviet Union. It's something he said he's going to do for basically since he's been in office. We just ignored it. Act 2 was going to be the emergence and coming to light of a very hegemonic, a very aggressive Iran, looking to exact its hegemonic desires in the Middle East with a nuclear undertone. Act 3, I think, speaks to what you're talking about, which is the key driver behind this is the CCP, particularly Xi, and his desire, along with Putin, to look at the West and look at kind of Western society and culture and realize that the last 300 years, this whole kind of idea of libertarianism has failed, and it's time to replace it with what the world has always been used to, which is strong, centralized command and control, which is what Xi is trying to do. And I think that's what we've seen play out here. Along those trends, Ben, talk to me about kind of y'all's pivot and desire to move more into this space. Not only talking about creating or shrinking the inequality wealth gap, but also shoring up in the foundations of kind of our domestic infrastructure and manufacturing. How important does that play into national security?
So I think it's incredibly important. One thing with Putin, just on that front, I was talking to General Tate about it, and he made a comment that resonates. He's like, first of all, we all just need to understand that Putin is a bad guy. Just take that off the table. And once we're done with that, then it's very important that we understand who our adversaries are and also how to counter our adversaries. If we're too caught up in talking about how bad they are, we can't actually address the threats that are out there. We cannot counter any of their maneuvers. So we have to be able to recognize them, but then also understand how they're going to be coming at us, so that we can be effective in then addressing them as the adversaries that they are. And too often we allow domestic politics to drive foreign policy. And that's an absolute critical point of failure that we do need to keep our eye on. So when we get from there into supply chain, so we have a whole thesis around global supply chain and how important it is that America has the ability to keep some of our adversaries from being right there 2 hours from our border, right next to our border in many cases, or in any of the other places that are absolutely critical to us maintaining what we view at our firm as two of our absolutely other critical natural resources. We need energy. That's absolutely critical in this room. Just show of hands, who would be at a complete loss if their phone were to die? and anyone who didn't put their hand up is a liar. So that is the new normal. We're in the information age, the digital age. We have to have access to information constantly. We have to be connected constantly. All of that requires energy. And when we think about energy, it gets us into a conversation around rare earth minerals as another critical resource, and where are those produced? Some are produced here, certainly, but many are produced overseas. We then have to refine them and make sure that we have our own supply chain secured around those rare earth minerals. And if we don't, which China's been very aggressive at grabbing control of those supply chains, then we are going to actually run out of energy. And we're also going to run out of many of the other interesting things that energy provides, AI being top of mind, quantum computing being a very dangerous area that, if we don't maintain superiority in, could absolutely compromise the battlefield, not the physical battlefield, but the cyber battlefield. So there's a lot going on there. I'm more than happy to dive into some of the deeper theses, but this idea that we need influence and territory control abroad is not just for the good of us saying we're the biggest, baddest kid on the block. It's that we actually need these rare earth minerals to stay relevant as the battlefield evolves.
That's a very important point, because when we say we're a national security investor, the next sentence behind that is we don't necessarily directly invest in guns and bullets and weapons platforms. We're investors in kind of the deep tech, AI, quantum, machine learning, rare earth processing, cybersecurity, the ancillary tech that makes our weapon systems more effective, but also has a much greater application in the private sector. I mean, so dual use is kind of the theme, and it's critical there. I mean, for example, going back to the phone analogy, I mean, look at the apps and the capabilities you have on your iPhone. GPS, Wi-Fi, encryption, VPNs, Bluetooth. These are all technologies that had always kind of had their infancy and development in the defense industry, and then had gone out to the private sector. I think one of the things we're seeing now is the exact opposite, where the DoD is saying, okay, we're going to be the primary developers of kinetic technologies, working with the defense contractors, things that go boom, kill people, weapon systems. We're going to rely on the private sector on everything else. So that innovation is going to come from the private sector. On its surface, that's a great thing. The downside of it is that opens up our entire flank. Because of our open society, China didn't wake up 2 years ago and decided they wanted to be kind of the biggest, baddest guys on the block. They wanted to be the superpower, not a superpower, the superpower. So they've been waging a 25-year war against us that we've been completely asleep at the wheel of, and innovation is a big piece of it. And not to make any heavy knocks on Silicon Valley, but who's ever heard the term In-Q-Tel? IQT, In-Q-Tel, it's the venture arm of CIA. It was started 25 years ago. They had a sizable first check in this little startup called Palantir. They were early investors in GPS, Google Earth. By the number of deals, they're traditionally one of the most active investors in Silicon Valley. Who do you think the second most active investor in Silicon Valley has been? Any guesses?
Department of Energy?
No, I wish. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, either directly, indirectly, through cutout and shell companies, they've been systematically trying to buy technology and innovation. That's the downfall or the downside of a strong totalitarian regime, is people don't innovate in that kind of a construct. Innovation happens in a liberal, open, libertarian society, which is what we have. That's our asymmetric edge, but they've been stealing that for years. So there's been a wake-up call now where you're starting to see more of a need to bring innovation in, but it's vetted capital, it's clean capital, it's capital that has an intent to make sure that our way of society and life succeeds, which is, again, making the individual the center of that.
Actually, on that point, Hamlet, because it's so critical, when we think about our freedoms in this country too, and why do we invest in people, China has how much population? 1.3 billion.
With a rounding error, yeah.
And we have somewhere between, depending on immigration on any given day, 330 million to 400 million, somewhere in that zone. We don't know. But we have less by a lot. And we think it's imperative that we invest in the development of every one of those people. We are losing the arms race from just a manpower perspective, and we're not going to catch up. There's no way we're going to get to 1.3 billion people in this country anytime soon. So how do we make sure that we have just as many engineers in particular, other IT professionals, the people that are going to innovate? How do we ensure that those people will continue to be productive in our society and be able to counter the conscription, the forced labor, the anything else that can happen when you have that many people, and maintain our dominance? And we think it's imperative. If you don't invest in every single person, you could miss the next Palantir. You can miss the next great idea. We have to provide that support structure just as a means of national security. We do need our people to be able to express themselves, have the freedom to be able to make those decisions on their own lives and how they want to be part of the American dream. And surprise, surprise, this great thing called the American dream, if you think about the later generations, they don't even believe in it. It's a lost hope generation at the moment. I've seen stats all across the board in addition to just talking to my daughter who, you think in our family, we love this country. I was talking to my daughter the other day and she's like, my friends do not like America. They don't even like America. She's 12. This is our future. They don't like America. They don't like anything that this country stands for. They think that this country is a bully and is hurting the rest of the world. That's, in my mind, part of the national security issue that we also need to address, the hearts, minds, and souls of the people in this country, so provide the economic opportunity, but also ensure that people understand what this country stands for. There's no other country in the world where people are trying this desperately to get over here, and that's for good reason. This is the best place on the planet. And certainly if China were the best place, or Russia, or Iran, or anywhere else, they'd probably be calling us saying, hey, what are you guys doing wrong? We need them to go back over there. So it is a critical effort to protect this resource of human capital. And I do think that this battlefield, so I mentioned battlefield and cyber, it extends to the media, extends to technology, all those technology apps on the phone, but we have to be vigilant on that front, and particularly when it comes to the next generation.
Two points, if I may. Number one, you and I have talked a lot about this, Hamlet, and I love this guy. I have a lot of respect for him. The Cold War. We've talked a lot about the second Cold War. I like that term, but at the same time, I don't like that term because we won the first Cold War, and I don't want us to be lulled into the confidence that we can win the second one by doing what we did the first time, because the world is much different now. The other thing is, when you look at, in reference to the Cold War, or even World War III, I mean, you look at the Cold War now, there are probably, I think the last count I had, there were about 32 ongoing armed conflicts in the world right now. We know about the major ones, but there's about 32. When you think about it, Israel is being attacked by all sides, on all fronts. North Korea just sent troops to Russia that may be used in Ukraine in an invasion. We've got problems at our own border. We've got major wars going on in both the Middle East and with Iran. The world is a hot spot. It's not really a Cold War right now. But if you even look at, and the general can probably comment on this better than I could, but if you look at when did World War I become World War I? And it wasn't when it was starting. It was well after it had ended. And when did World War II become World War II? The same thing. So I would argue in some ways, we may not be willing to admit that we're in a war, but our enemies certainly do admit and understand that they're at war with us. And there's a book, it's not a wonderful book, but it's an interesting book written by two Chinese colonels. I'm forgetting the name now. Unrestricted Warfare, but that book is available on Amazon. It's translated into English. Two Chinese colonels wrote this, and it talks about all the things that we're talking about today and about what your organization is about. And that is all the implements of national power. Will of the people. Strong fundamental principles that your country is based on. Religion, your economic strength, your GDP, and your military power. All of those things are, in their book, are being used to defeat their number one competitor, and that's the United States of America and or the West. Thank you.
Completely spot on. I think, to me, that is 100% recommended reading is the book Unrestricted Warfare, because we're seeing it play out in front of us. And the Chinese, and particularly the CCP, does not want to fight directly. They fight through proxies, and they get you to fight yourself from one side. And the tenets of cultural, economic, societal warfare that's been raging against us for 20 plus years is I think just now starting to come to light. And I'm actually glad that the follow-on piece to this is education, because to your point, if I'm the Chinese and I think that at one point I want to displace the 800-pound gorilla, which is the United States government or the US and their influence, I want to make sure that when I'm ready to go to war with that country, their entire generation is gender confused, hopped up on fentanyl, is mentally broken, is unfit, and doesn't like the country, so not going to want to defend it. That, to me, is kind of the foundation of the concept of cognitive warfare, which is a big part of what the first Cold War was about. We wrote the playbook on asymmetric irregular cognitive warfare. That's how we won the Cold War. Stuck it on a shelf and then started playing whack-a-mole for 20 years in the desert and just went with guns, bullets, and door kickers, and didn't realize that the Chinese were kind of taking notes there. And I've long said that we're getting into a second Cold War, then I've pivoted to Cold War 2.0, but being a movie junkie from the 80s who became Americanized in the Greatest Generation or Greatest Decade Ever, I liken this to a really bad Rocky movie. One, we like to get our ass beat for 12 rounds before we wake up and fight back, but we knocked out the Russians and we kind of celebrated and didn't realize that Drago stood up and into the ring came the CCP and the Iranians with ample notes of our TTPs, our tactics, and are waging a lot of that battle against us. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's time for proper wokeism, where we understand that there is a whole of society approach we need to bring to bear here. And this transitions, or this goes along political lines. I mean, I have an idea of which way this room leans, but President Obama kind of began this idea of bringing innovation to national security. President Trump significantly accelerated it. It's one of the many things that the Biden administration has not backed off of, and this need to bring private sector innovation into the fight is critical. But I would argue that we also need to make sure that that innovation and technology that comes into our society is technology that we are comfortable with and does not put too much control and centralized power in the hand of the few, and it allows us as a society to kind of dictate our own future and not allow government or a handful of power centers to do that. So making sure the right AI systems, the right platforms get in, making sure that we have morality in terms of ethics of warfare. Those are all kind of heavier topics we're not going to fully delve into today, but those are the discussions that need to start happening. If not, then we're going to have a pretty contentious couple of years in front of us.
Could I comment on one more thing? That's the American dream and children that don't like America. I see that a lot. I work with a lot of young people, universities and schools, and I've worked with young people in the military. I have grandchildren that I talk to, and I see the same thing, and it troubles me quite a bit. I've traveled a lot. I mean, I've worked in almost every continent. I haven't worked in Antarctica nor the Arctic, nor do I care to, but I've worked in all the others. And I can tell you firsthand experience that there is no nation more generous, more compassionate, or more tolerant than the United States of America is. We are exceptional in many ways. There's no nation I can name that's more diverse than the United States of America is. And I know I get frustrated sometimes when I'm talking to young people because they've just not learned that through our education system. And we, as adults, we have got to repair that. We've got to fill that gap, and we've got to talk to the people that do educate our children. Now, on behalf of the young people, I do also want to say I was in Afghanistan the early days when the war opened up in Afghanistan after 9/11. And we had, some of us who were a little older at the time, had some doubts about how the newer, younger generation would perform in war. And I have to tell you, it was absolutely amazing to see the spirit and the tenacity and the courage that they displayed. They were incredible. And I just think there's somewhere between when you're in school or when you first get out of school to when you sort of get comfortable in your first job and you start to find out what the world's all about and what reality is, that you start to open your eyes. And I think we all as parents and adults share a responsibility in helping with that transition.
Just anyone add to that, or?
Always happy to dovetail on something. That's one of our favorite topics. Education is so critical. I did want to also, though, talk about, you mentioned something very interesting on our playbook, and how should we be thinking about the approach to this foreign relations type issue that we're going through with this axis of enemies that we're facing, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Another thing that I was talking to the good general about, he said the more sophisticated foreign military strategies can be summarized in a very neat acronym called DIME. Diplomacy is the D, information and messaging is the I, M is for military, and the E is the economy. And if we can leverage those more sophisticated strategies appropriately, we can have a strong stance on the global stage. And in the last administration, perfect example of that is the Abraham Accords, where we went ahead and leveraged the economy to offset centuries, generations of hatred. Very effective policy. We had a lot of pressure, maximum pressure that was being placed on a foreign adversary to keep them in check, because we do have to understand, to the first point, who our adversaries are, and they're not going to change, and how to keep them in check so that we can continue to have this American dream. And unfortunately, in the next administration, that wonderful policy where we had military being deployed in the Persian Gulf, we had economic pressure and sanctions, we had the Houthis actually listed as a terrorist organization. All of that was turned upside down. We released $6 billion for 6 hostages, no more audits of nuclear anything, and military gone, and all sorts of a pull out of Afghanistan. Name another thing that we did. All of a sudden we have one ally left in the Middle East. So we have one place where we're getting intelligence from. And then our domestic politics is dictating that we don't even support that one singular place where we can actually trust what's going on in the Middle East. There are only eyes and ears left in the area. That is absolutely crazy to me. I do not understand how we got there. That's terrible policy from a foreign stage. We're viewed as very weak because we're not keeping anyone in check, and we're seeing all these conflicts around the world, everything else. There's a reason they're happening right now. It's because we do not have DIME being implemented in any way, shape, or form, and we're just letting our adversaries run amok. So I do think it's imperative that we understand what those sophisticated levers are. We do have to use those, and we have to use them compassionately, certainly. We're not doing anything that I think should be viewed as, many folks in the media would say, and what they're telling our children in schools, is the big bad wolf of America running around trying to chase the 3 little piggies or whatever else types of fables they want to tell the kids these days. We have to actually be responsible with the position that we've been blessed to be in. And that requires us to understand who the adversaries are and how to approach that, utilizing every different lever. It's not always a military solution. In many cases, diplomacy. The economy is a very powerful tool. Information and messaging is very good to control. And right now, those policies are being used back on us. And it's why we're in the situation we're in. And hopefully, we're going to be able to wake up and do a little bit better relatively soon.
Completely agree there. I think you said the we comment multiple times, and I think what that encompasses, it's not just about electing the right politicians locally, state, and the federal level. We can't be passive at this point. This second Cold War, Third World War, whatever conflict we want to call it, if we leave it in the hands of the politicians and the bureaucrats in DC, we're going to lose it. This is about mobilizing private capital, private innovation, private sector, education. It's a whole of society approach. It's exactly what China or the CCP has been waging against us for 25 years. The only difference is, there's a law in China, in Beijing, that says that they will second private innovation or private entities to be part of the national security apparatus. It's like a conscription of the private sector. we have an all-volunteer army. And I think, and I would argue, we have an all-volunteer cadre of capitalists that have no fear of going out and making a ton of money and driving American values and ideals. We just need to find a way to unleash that. And it's okay for wealthy people to create jobs and create wealth on top of that, because last time I checked, a wealthy person doesn't just stuff money away under a mattress and does nothing with it. They spend it, they invest it. And that drives economic foundations, at times economic growth. With what you and I had talked about as far as investing or backing underserved founders, or founders in general. When you invest in two guys in the garage, or a guy and a girl in the garage, what happens? It turns into 6, 7 people. They get a WeWork or a Regis or a Venture X, and they turn to 20 people. That's domestic job creation. It's domestic wealth creation. It's not a service-based job. It's a high-paying job, and that's where I think it's unleashing private innovation, private capital, or culture on the West is kind of the key point here. We can, I think, talk about this for probably another 2 hours, but I do want to kind of flip this a bit and get some dialogue going with you guys. And instead of opening with a question, since we have General Tada here with us, who was the former Undersecretary of Defense in the Pentagon, I'm going to ask him to, I guess, say a couple comments about, I know you were on Bartiromo's broadcast this morning talking about a lot of the things and issues we discussed here. Would love your comments and engagement here as well.
Two, can you hear me? Great, thank you. What a great conversation. And Tony Tata, retired Army Brigadier General, former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, former Superintendent of Schools of Wake County, Raleigh, North Carolina, former Secretary of Transportation in North Carolina as well. And I mentioned that because this sort of whole of government approach that Ben referenced with DIME, diplomacy, information messaging, military, economic. I've lived it from the city, county, state, federal level. And what I see today in our national defense strategy, we have China, Russia, Iran, North Korea as the listed adversaries of the United States. And what are they all doing? They're doing exactly what the panel talked about, and they're operating together. North Korea is sending what resources it can to Russia. Why? To help retake the Kursk region of Russia and reestablish the Russian border there, using North Korean soldiers. That's a big deal. China providing money, funding to Russia in exchange for oil. Iran providing drones to Russia in exchange for S-400 air defense systems to try to shoot down Israeli F-35s. And so this coalition that's formed, the ambassador's exactly right, the war has already started. We may not have joined it yet directly, but certainly we're providing arms to Ukraine. Certainly we're providing counter-rocket ability to Israel. And certainly I wish that we were putting more pressure on Iran. And so this idea that these 4 competitors have coalesced, take that now to the cyber level, and the having sat on the Defense Technology Board in my previous role, quantum tunneling, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as Ben said, human capital. Right now, we have some people that come and work for big tech, and then they want to go back to China or go to China. That has to be approved by DoD, the Defense Technology Security Agency, that reported to me. And I would review these cases and I would say under no circumstances. But there's an absolute flight of human capital to our adversaries, those 4 big adversaries that come over here, learn the key skill sets, and then go somewhere else. And that, to me, as this panel has very articulately said, is the big problem we face right now, because that's the next frontier. Quantum tunneling, this idea of human capital that can do those kinds of things, and the technology that they develop. To me, Hamlet, that's the real issue.
Very, very, very well put. So we have a few minutes here for additional comments, Q&A. Anything from the audience, any areas you guys want to kind of dive deeper on and discuss?
You mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, the narrative around building a vision, and you're better off with us, and you might be with China, we're hoping for your success. After Afghanistan, reliability. So where would you put us on a scale of 1 to 5 before Afghanistan, and where would you put us on a scale of 1 to 5 after Afghanistan, and how do we get back up again, if you think we're down? Afghanistan would be the short answer.
Right. Obviously, Afghanistan was pivotal. It has changed everything. And if you can imagine, in the business I used to be in, it was to convince people to share intelligence with the United States and to assure them that we would always have their back. You don't have to worry about us because we're always there. We'll always have your back. This is the right thing to do. That's no longer the case. It's no longer the case. We proved, whether it's true or not, we demonstrated to the world, the perception is that we can no longer be counted on. And I think the perception I saw on the diplomatic side of the house, and this is important too, because it's not just where there's conflict, but where there are diplomatic relationships. We have demonstrated that treaties don't really mean that much. Things can change when administrations change, and agreements that were made in good faith can be dissolved in an instant. And I don't think you win that back quickly. That's the problem, and that's what we're getting at, or what I'm getting at. I don't think you win back the trust of the world immediately, or that it changes quickly. I think it takes time, and I think it takes, we have to be more forward-leaning in making sure the world knows the foundations of our liberty and our principles and the fundamentals that we stand for. And we have to stand for those things. Even when administration changes and maybe you don't agree with everything, if you made an agreement with another country bilaterally, we need to withhold that agreement and stand up to that. And I just, sadly, I think it's going to take a lot of time, and it's going to take a lot of effort on our part to turn that around. But excellent question, and very insightful to bring that up because it's a huge issue.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for this panel. My name is Michael Gargiulo. I'm the CEO at VPN.com. We deal with a lot of cybersecurity issues, and on the El Salvador front, from a cyber standpoint, you got to clean the worms out of the house before you can, stop them from, coming back in. In America, we have a major game problem, and El Salvador was known for this. In fact, one of the worst, to my understanding. And the president there had a particular strategy that seemed to work. I don't know if it would work in America, but how do we take some of the insights that El Salvador was successful with in terms of cleaning their own house and deal with the game? I mean, you got Aurora, they're breaking in, they're taking over whole blocks now. And I'm sure it's much worse in El Salvador, but what are your thoughts on that and what could work in America?
Well, another excellent question, and just to put that more into context, in 2017, El Salvador was the murder capital of the world. I won't go through all the numbers, but the murder capital of the world. The only place more dangerous were places where there was open armed conflict. And now, if you look at their numbers statistically, they are the safest nation in the Western Hemisphere, safer than we are. And the one thing that changed all of that was not just the will of the president, but the will of the nation to hold criminals accountable for things they did. And that's tough. And I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received or how many people that have talked to me about from other countries that say we would like to implement what President Bukele did in our nation. How do we do that? And it's tough because the first thing is you have to have the national will to hold people accountable. Now, I talked to our former president about people being arrested and going into the prisons in El Salvador because the conditions there are not good. But then again, just the living standards in El Salvador are not what we're accustomed to here in America either. So I found myself frequently talking to people in America about, you have to compare prison in El Salvador with life in El Salvador. In prison, they get things they don't have in normal life. They get 3 meals a day, they have a place to live, they get medical attention when they need it. And one thing that President Bukele and I are still friends, one thing that he told me recently that was news to me, he said, if you look at the mortality rate, the fatality rate of prisoners that are in our prisons, they're better than yours are right now. He says it's not a country club because these are prisoners. They've committed horrific crimes, but they have a life that's better than the lives of a lot of Salvadoran people that are struggling in poverty, and their fatality rate is actually better than yours. So I think that was amazing, but I think the secret is we have to hold people accountable, and that requires a national will to do that.
So, excuse me, so I fully agree with the panel about the need to unleash American capital to fight back and understand the national security implications of the supply chain. I would love to hear your comments on the ESG investing environment, in which I believe is frankly a cartel that's preventing us from being able to do that, and how ESG being imposed on our business environment poses national security concerns.
I'll begin, I'll throw it to Ben. I think you get rid of ESG and you replace it with LIV, liberty, independence, and the family values, or is that V or F, I don't know. But it's investing in America, not into a bullshit scorecard that doesn't mean anything. So,
Okay, but
I know it was on camera, sorry.
So I'll maybe provide the more politically correct version. Okay? So I remember when ESG was like not a policy, and it was just, can we do nice things for the world with our capital? Non-concessionary return profile, so it wasn't an offset. It was just, if you can do good for the world while you're investing, we should all celebrate it. And then, like so many things in DC, it's turned into a policy, and that turned into regulation, and then all of a sudden we have a problem. So I think ESG has been turned into an absolute bastardization of what it was initially supposed to be. When it first came out, I thought it was great. Can we actually invest and do good for the world? Yes, let's do that. That's America. That's what this country was built on. All the Rockefellers, Vanderbilt, name another group. They gave back so much that this country went from a nothing type equation on the global stage to the world leader in a century. It was absolutely amazing, a century and a half. We've got to get away from making everything a political issue. And I think ESG is a lost cause now. It was an interesting idea that you could invest responsibly. I don't think we should leave that behind. I just think it has to be called something else. And we need to take away all these policies that require a bunch of extra cost to be put into the structure of investing that in and of itself make it a non-starter. Like, I don't want to invest my dollars, have to report on a bunch of things that really shouldn't matter to my shareholders just because someone else thought they were important. I'd rather be able to figure out what's important to me and important to my shareholders that is in alignment with what we're doing anyway to generate them a return, and everybody wins. And we started doing arbitrage, like we're actually off the charts on ESG, like on our particular fund, but we started doing that before it was a regulated initiative. I remember on our last fundraise, talking to all the consultants, they're like, oh my goodness, you guys should be a new category of ESG. You guys are doing so much good for the world, and your returns are top 1% of all time. I'm not fundraising, by the way, currently, so I'm allowed to talk about our returns. As my disclaimer, I get a disclaimer. So we ended up being a top 1% of all time private equity returner. We meanwhile did so much good that we're off the charts on ESG, and what we were awarded for that is more regulatory red tape. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the short answer, anything that becomes overly politicized, please let's just use a different term. At that point, we need to reduce the regulatory burden, and especially if we're going to maintain dominance in this technology arms race we're in. If we start stacking quantum investing with a bunch of red tape, China wins. Same with cybersecurity. Same with all these other critical technologies and things that we need to be investing in. This is not a nice to have. It is a need, and the more barriers we have, the slower we're going to be able to maintain our dominance, which means someone else will get ahead.
Hi. You mentioned the mindset of the next generation. And you talked about standing by the values, and we all know how amazing this country is to live in, and what that means, right, what the American dream used to stand for. What do you think is a meaningfully viable solution to change that messaging? Because it's not just this next generation. When I travel internationally, it's the same mindset. You know, it used to be that America was looked at as this bastion of freedom, and now it's almost like, what the heck are you guys doing? What do you see as actually meaningful? Because it's not like shoving it down their throats. It's not being the traditional conservative values or whatever the Republicans have been doing for the last decade in the side of culture thing. So what do you actually see as a meaningful route to change that messaging?
I'll begin there. Obviously, please comment in here. One of the things I'm actually seeing, and I'm hoping this is the beginning of a sea change, is the whole concept of go woke, go broke. Again, child of the 80s, and I grew up under Red Dawn and War Games and some of the best movies ever in the span of 10 years. But you're starting to see Hollywood starting to pivot back. Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan, some of the shows that are popular right now are kind of a throwback to what was no longer popular, which was a strong alpha male, explosions and guns and actions. But you're starting to see parts of Hollywood look at China and says, well, you know, if the Chinese are shutting us out, then screw them. How do we start pushing a message that is pro-democracy, pro-libertarianism, pro-America? So that's part of the cognitive warfare. I think that's one thing we absolutely need to start seeing, because that does play into what you said earlier in terms of education. Younger kids are being raised to hate America because that's been programming that's been pushed in front of them, not necessarily by Hollywood, but by sources of capital and influence outside of this country that want to rock that foundation. So step number one is identifying the threat and the issue you're in, any gunfight you're in, or in a situation like this, is you address a threat. And we're starting to realize this is an issue, and how do we tactically start reacting to it? Entertainment is one piece of it, cultural is a piece of it, but education I think is a foundational piece of that.
You know, one of the things the military does, and they do it very well, is if you're a commander, you have a vision, and you make sure the people that are in your command know your vision. They know what the commander's intent is, and what his vision is for his unit and for the unit's mission. And I think we all have a responsibility to ensure that the vision of America gets told and retold. It's a good vision. I'm reminded of a ceremony I went to in El Salvador when I was the ambassador, and some of you may remember it was about 4.5 years ago, I think, that the World Food Program won the Nobel Peace Prize. So I went to the ceremony for the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the local representative there in El Salvador of the World Food Program. So I was talking to the guy, very nice guy, I think he was from Belgium, and we were having a conversation before the ceremony, and he looks at me and he says, well, you don't really understand, do you, Mr. Ambassador? And I'm like, well, understand what? And he said, without the generosity of the United States, which pays for over 70% of the World Food Program, we wouldn't exist. And I thought to myself, no one knows that. We don't tell our own story very well. And so I think we all bear responsibility in sort of telling our story and reminding each other and others of what the American dream is. And the other responsibility that is posted all over the world right now is the media. Journalism used to mean journalism. It's rare that we see that anymore. And I'm not arguing one political side or the other, but if you claim to be a journalist and not an entertainer, and you're putting out the news, it should be the events of that news cycle, not the events packaged in a way to support a certain narrative, or not, and this always concerns me in the future, not events that were created that didn't even occur, but can be created with AI to support a certain narrative. The news should be the news, and Americans need to clearly understand what our fundamental principles are, what we're all about, what we stand for, what we will always stand for, and we have to continue consistently to put that message out.
Yeah, I think the history and telling the truth is critical. And we have an incredible set of documents that is the foundation of our country. An incredible set of documents. those documents reference values, they reference inalienable rights bestowed by the Creator, all sorts of other wonderful things that our Christian forefathers thought were important, they still put in separation of church and state. So it's not to say that everyone has to be a Christian, but we certainly need a core set of values that as a country we believe to be true. And there's documents that were very well crafted that allow us to do that. And I say allow specifically, they do not force us to do it, they allow us to do that. And it's incumbent upon us to ensure that those documents, that allowance that we've been granted, is preserved and protected. And for that to happen, we have to tell the truth, we have to share the narrative, we have to share the whole truth. We can't candy coat the truth. There's not always the best light that America has painted in every single period throughout history. We need to share the entire truth, and we need to do that in a way that aligns with our core values so the next generation can understand their history. If you don't know where you're coming from, you cannot possibly understand where you're going. If you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything. I love all these quotes around not understanding the basis of why you make decisions. And I think that that piece is the critical piece. And I love that we're talking about national security with the standpoint of, so I was at an event for Peter Thiel out in California where he's talking about faith as well, being included in all of this. We don't need to necessarily beat people over the head with the Bible or any other religious doctrine, but we do need to have a common value system. And I think one of the greatest tragedies that we face in this country, there used to be the church in the center of the community, and you had your families attached to the church, and you had two-parent households that were then raising children, and that was a nice continuous cycle. It created a great foundation for those communities. That is being destroyed at an aggressive pace by messaging, by narratives. I don't want to get too far into all the things going on. I don't think it's all coming from this country. There's a disinformation campaign going on. There's a whole lot of things distracting the kids these days. Two-parent households, though, are very important in the development of young children. And if you think about someone coming from childhood, if they do three things, they have a 90% reduced rate of going to prison. This is underserved communities. Can you complete high school? Can you wait until after you get married and wait until after marriage to have children? Those are the three. Just finish high school, get married, wait to have children until after marriage. If you do that, you have a 90% less chance to go to prison. So those are values, that's all it is. And we've got to get back to that very wonderfully written set of documents that govern this country. As always said, it's a wonderful system if we can keep it. And that's incumbent on us to do.
I think we have time for one more question, and then I think we'll transition into kind of closing remarks. So,
well, I had a two-part question, but we'll just do the second half because it's more fun. What do you think about TikTok?
Boo.
Well, should it be banned? Should it be sold to the U.S.? Should Oracle own TikTok?
yeah, so this kind of goes into the whole concept of technology. Technology is not evil. Technology is not good. Technology is exactly what it is. It's technology. It's an inert item. So TikTok is fine. It's how you choose to use TikTok that derives its benevolence or its harm. I can take a loaded M4 here, put it on this table. It's not going to cause a single bit of damage to this room. It's how we decide to interact with that that's going to cause its harm. It's the norms and it's the practices we put upon it. TikTok in China, my understanding, is good. It's got governors and regulators around it. It's used for education. It's used as a way to push out positive messaging in China. TikTok in America, you can argue, not so good. It rots the brains of youth. Throw a stupid viral campaign out there and it turns into digital fentanyl. So again, technology by itself isn't good or bad. It's how we'd adopt it and what are the norms we put around it from a cultural standpoint that derives its benefit. You can say the same thing about AI. You can say the same thing about drones, counter-drone technology. I mean, the list goes on. Technology in itself is not evil. It's how we decide to use it, the controls we give to it that derives its benefit or its weakness. So going back to what I was saying earlier, we're about to go through a significant amount of disruptive change driven by technology. The way we live our lives is going to change completely. It is on us as a society to make sure that the technology that we create and we launch out in the wild has some strict governance and controls around it that technology is used to benefit society, not control
And it's a morality question, right? So we've got technology, it's not evil, but there's a morality to technology. And I think if we can ever solve that equation, we'll have a lot of good answers. But it's a complicated issue. If it were up to me, the thing would just be gone because it's too complicated to solve quick enough in my mind. And right now it is a security threat. And it does need to not be on everyone's phone, and it does need to not be pumping a bunch of information through that is not, I think, in line with the country's vote. But that's just my opinion. I do not represent the U.S. government, yada, yada. So I think the morality question, though, is a really good one, and that should be, I'm thinking we'd get into it a little bit today, morality with technology, but that is a much broader topic and something that we do need to stay vigilant around.
Well, you know you have a problem too when you say something like the United States federal government tells all of its employees that they can't use TikTok. And then the people that just told you that you can't use TikTok put something out on TikTok. So you have that issue. But you go back to the issue of morality and values and sort of our fundamental beliefs. How does a child, a young person, or even an adult, how do they know when they're looking at something that they should find that abhorrent? That it should be something that does not, give them a good feeling, but it makes them feel like, I don't want to see any more of this. How internally do they process that information, get to the point where they say, this is something I don't want to see anymore? Because I'll go back to a discussion I had with President Bukele in El Salvador when I got very upset with a certain social media company, the largest in the world at the time. I got very upset with them and I said, well, I'm not going to use that anymore. And he looked at me and he said, don't surrender the platform. Don't surrender the platform because you can't stop it. And I feel that way a little bit about TikTok. Maybe we can stop it, but if you do, something else is going to replace it. And the millions upon millions of young people in particular, but adults too, that look at TikTok and use TikTok for their businesses and for other purposes, they're going to find another way. They're going to find something else. So I would seriously look at not surrendering the platform, but look at how can we ensure that that things don't go out that are being intended to change the way people believe, and how do we get our own citizens to recognize something when they're looking at it that's intended to influence them and not something that's intended to entertain so much as to influence.
We're nearing our time here, so I want to leave a few minutes for parting and closing comments. Ben, let's start with you.
I did not have a pre-prepared speech, but this has been a lot of fun, and I do think that we need more conversations like this. When Hamlet first asked me to come down, I said it's Miami. Of course, I'll come to Miami. I love the city. So I was excited to come down and see some good friends and everything else. But this conversation needs to be happening on a regular basis, and it's imperative that there's more private capital that is thinking about ways to invest in our national security interests. The government has a lot of money, but it needs to stop spending all that money because our debt has gotten a bit higher than it probably needs to be. And we've got to start leveraging the very powerful economic engine that we have in this country, the human capital, the resources that exist here are very powerful and can advance our critical initiatives for national security probably better in the private sector in combination with government than the government can alone. And we're very interested in where is that intersectionality between capital, people, and national security. If there are ways to get into supply chain from there, secure those resources, I think that should be a regular conversation. I'm starting to hear more of that, thankfully. But I'll tell you, even in speaking to the global supply chain for one of the big Fortune 100s, they have no clue, they have no plan. It is a massive investment opportunity. And even as we're sitting here, we're talking to one of the largest international supply companies in the world about investing to solve their supply chain gaps. That is literally the investment thesis. They are handing us the companies to invest in and secure because we cannot let those companies, those critical resources, get into the hands of our foreign adversaries. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot more conversations. The morality conversation has to stay front and center, but we are in the middle of a firefight. This is not a peaceful time. And if we can't do our best as citizens of this country to secure our national security interests, I'm somewhat nervous. I don't think the government can do it alone, but it's not also an altruistic effort entirely. There's a lot of ways for that to benefit many of the investment groups that are here. So looking forward to more of these. Thank you for having me.
So, have you ever thought about the difference between what a nation is and what a country is? I looked into that once because I was curious, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I love it, so I'm going to use it. A nation is the people, it's the culture, it's the food, it's the music, it's the principles, the fundamental principles of family and what pulls a people together. Think about it in terms of a tribe. A country is all those things plus a government. So to try and push politics aside, which is very difficult for me, so if you can't love the country, love the nation, love who we are, what we are. We are one people. And regardless of your political persuasions, I think we have many more things in common than we do that separate us. And if you look at things that matter the most to a nation, those are the things we agree on. It's only the small things that we disagree on. And I believe we need to look for things that we can work on together, things that we agree on, push those other things that maybe aren't as important to our national survival and our economy and our way of life, push those things to the side and take them out one at a time and work through compromise on those, but let's focus on the things we agree on and turn this country around and make America strong, not political thing, but make America strong and get back to the fundamentals that we all believe in and made our nation great.
I can't top it. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time, for participating, and I want to thank the Economic Club for having us. Time to get involved, time to get engaged. Let's unleash Americana capitalism on the problems we have, and I think we'll be fine. So, thank you, gentlemen.